This is your daily dose of all things royal.
You know, this is a guy who made fun of us for having a Bill of Rights and protected free speech in this country. And remember he did that interview and he was like, "You have a First Amendment that you can pretty much say anything. I think that's bonkers." It's like, dude, then go back to England. Oh, that's right. Everyone hates you there, and your dad's the king, and he has disowned you. So you can't go back there. So if you're going to be here, no matter where you go, you have to play by that country's rules. Whenever someone gets arrested for, having weed pens in Russia, Brittany Griner, a part of me doesn't feel bad because you went over to Russia and it's like, "Oh, sorry, I was in a hurry when I packed." That doesn't matter. If you take shotgun shells to Turks and Caicos, you're going to wind up in prison. It completely sucks, but being an American doesn't entitle you to our privileged American criminal justice system, and being from the UK and being a pinky-raised fancy lad doesn't give you extra privilege when you come over to the US, even if you are married to the most annoying American citizen there is.
Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. It looks like Christmas is gonna come early. Breaking news here, folks. Literally just dropped. New court records revealed the Department of State, which oversees visa applications, is holding 1,007 documents relating to Harry's case. According to the records, 217 documents are held by the Office of the Secretary of State, the equivalent of the UK Foreign Secretary, while 517 potentially responsive records were found within the Bureau of Consular Affairs. The docs are now set to be reviewed by a federal judge in Washington to decide what, if any, may be released to the public. This comes after a lawsuit filed in January by the Heritage Foundation, which sued the Department of Homeland Security over access to Harry's immigration records. The article says the number of papers on Harry shows they are monitoring him pretty closely, meaning the U.S. government. The organization's attorney, Samuel Dewey, explained. "I think we're going to see documents from Harry talking about the case, but other material may be withheld. Then it will be up to politicians whether that decision is overruled." So to catch everybody up to speed, the Heritage Foundation is back at it again with trying to obtain Prince Harry's records. This time on January 29, 2025, Heritage Foundation files a lawsuit now against the Department of State. So apparently, Oversight Project Director Mike Howell filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the U.S. Department of State last year, September 2024, under the Biden administration. They asked for all records related to Prince Harry dating back to January 2020, when the alleged Megxit happened. Heritage said it was making this request in the public interest, not for commercial reasons, and asked the government to waive any kind of fees. They also pointed out that as a nonprofit and a media outlet through the Daily Signal, they regularly publish their findings to inform the public. The State Department responded in December, but instead of providing records, it denied the fee waiver, categorized Heritage as a news media requester, and demanded at least $62.50 to cover duplication costs before moving forward. Heritage immediately agreed to pay, but even after that, the request was still listed as on hold, and no documents were produced. By late January 2025, with the government missing its legal deadlines and offering no further communication, Heritage filed this lawsuit in federal court. Their complaint argues four main points. The first is that the State Department has failed to even conduct a proper search for the records. Second, that it is unlawfully withholding documents that should be released. Third, that the fee waiver was wrongly denied. And fourth, that because the agency missed FOIA's time limits, it cannot charge fees at all. Heritage is now asking the court to order the State Department to do its job, to search its files, release all non-exempt records related to Prince Harry, and cover Heritage's legal costs. In short, this lawsuit is about enforcing government transparency and making sure that State Department complies with the Freedom of Information Act. Pretty much it's the same cast of characters coming back. The district judge assigned to this case is, again, Carl J. Nichols. And from the government representing the Department of State is being argued again by John J. Bardo. He is the assistant U.S. attorney based in Washington, D.C., and he filed the department's answer in court on February 28, 2025, on behalf of the United States. This is the same John Bardo who was the Department of Homeland Security's legal representative stonewalling information about Harry's visa. Bardo has argued that such immigration documents should remain private, highlighting that visa information is confidential and likening it to other sensitive personal information such as health or education records. So in the government's official response to this lawsuit filed in February of 2025, the State Department admits that yes, the FOIA request was received, and yes, as of the lawsuit's filing, no records had been turned over. But the department pushes back hard against the accusations because it argues that processing is ongoing, denies that it has improperly withheld documents, and says that not all information requested under FOIA has to be released. The department also raises multiple legal defenses. For example, that some records may fall under FOIA exemptions. Now we're going back to this BS with the FOIA exemptions, that the plaintiff's request wasn't clearly described and that the court has no power to give the sweeping relief the plaintiffs are asking for. So what is it that the Heritage Foundation is asking for? Well, let's take a look at the initial FOIA request. Dated September 24th, 2024. Dear FOIA Officer, pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act 5 U.S.C. 552, I respectfully request the following from the U.S. Department of State. All records related to His Royal Highness Prince Henry, Charles, Albert, David, George of Wales, the Duke of Sussex, the Earl of Dumbarton, and Baron Kilkeel, KCVO, from January 2020 to the present. To further narrow down the scope of the request, requester does not seek correspondence that merely forwards press clippings, such as news accounts or opinion pieces, newsletters, and published or docketed materials, if that correspondence has no comment or no substantive comment added by any party in the thread. The terms pertaining to, referring, relating, or concerning with respect to any given subject means anything that constitutes, contains, embodies, reflects, identifies, states, refers to, deals with, or is in any manner whatsoever pertinent to the subject. The term record means any written, recorded, or graphic matter of any nature whatsoever, regardless of how recorded and whether original or copy, including but not limited to the following: memoranda, reports, expense reports, books, manuals, etc. MMS or SMS text messages, instant messages, messaging systems such as iMessage, Microsoft Teams, WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, Google Chat, Twitter direct messages, Link, Slack, and Facebook Messenger, contracts, cables, notations of any type of conversation, telephone call, voicemail, meeting, or other communication, bulletins, printed matter, computer printouts, teletypes, invoices, transcripts, diaries, and it goes on. As you can see here, we have correspondence, press releases, circulars, financial statements, reviews, opinions, offers, studies and investigations, questionnaires and surveys, and worksheets. Now, the justification for this is as follows. It says this request is primarily and fundamentally for non-commercial purposes. As a 501c3 nonprofit, Heritage Foundation does not have a commercial purpose, and the release of the information requested is not in Heritage Foundation's commercial interests. Heritage Foundation's mission is to formulate and promote public policies based on the principles of free enterprise, limited government, individual freedom, traditional American values, and a strong national defense. Heritage Foundation uses the information requested and analyzes it in order to educate the public through social media, broadcast media, traditional and non-traditional, and press releases. The requested information is in the public interest because former President Trump stated he would deport Prince Harry if he wins the presidential election. Now the source that was cited was Yahoo News, the leftist traditional media that Harry and Meghan used to make themselves look like victims. Obviously now is coming back to bite them in the arse. Says here, because this is a request by a member of the news media for information of public interests made in my capacity as an author for the Daily Signal, a major news outlet. I actively gather information of potential interest to our Daily Signal audience, and I use my editorial skills to turn raw materials into distinct work, and I distribute that work to our Daily Signal audience through podcasts or articles. So from what I'm gathering is that the Department of State is indicating that they're hunting down any type of files that they may have on Prince Harry and deciding whether or not it can be shared with the public in the public's interests. And Judge Nichols had mandated or gave the order for these joint status reports as of March 21st, 2025. And every 60 days, the team is coming back sharing what they've uncovered. So far, there's been 3 joint status reports, with the first status report that was given on April 21st, in which the State Department conducted an initial search for records in the bureaus that plaintiffs, aka the Heritage Foundation, asked the department to search, but the department located more than 1 million records. So obviously they had to go back to the drawing board and whittle this down, and they had 60 days to come back with another joint status report on June 20th. And in that report, it says, since the last joint status report, the State Department discussed with plaintiffs ways in which to narrow the scope of the records sought. The parties agreed to limit the search to a specific set of bureaus and offices within the department. Plaintiffs further clarified they are interested only in visa records concerning the visa application of Henry Charles Albert David and all records concerning the decision and/or deliberation regarding the granting or denial of that application. The department completed a search for the identified and narrowed records and is currently performing a relevancy review of the returned documents. The department agreed to provide plaintiffs an approximate number of records deemed responsive upon completion of this review, at which time the parties will discuss next steps in this litigation. Now, fast forward 60 days, and we have now come to the most recent joint status report, which is what is being reported now in the mainstream media. Bullet number 3 says the department identified 517 potentially responsive records from the Bureau of Consular Affairs, 2 potentially responsive records from the Office of the Deputy Secretary of State, and 271 potentially responsive records from the Office of the Legal Advisor, and 217 potentially responsive records from the Office of the Secretary. The department initially understood that plaintiff's request was limited to visa records, which the department would categorically withhold under Exemption 3. Now, if you remember, this was one of the big stinks that they put up to push back on releasing any information. And of course, we received that redacted, ridiculous document of everything completely redacted. It says here, bullet number 5, after discussions, the department now understands that plaintiffs would like the department to proceed with processing the identified documents in its usual course. As such, the department will proceed to a responsiveness review of the documents identified in paragraph number 3. It closes out by saying the department will consult with plaintiffs upon completion of the responsiveness review to arrange a mutually agreed upon processing and production schedule. Pursuant to the court's March 31st, 2025 minute order, the parties will file their next joint status report in 60 days on October 20th, 2025. Respectfully submitted, Janine Ferris Pirro, United States Attorney, by John J. Bardo. Now, I don't know if you understand the significance of Janine Pirro and who she is. Yes, she has a very important role, and she is a badass lawyer. but also very beloved by the conservatives because she was also a commentator on Fox. And here she is talking about Harry and Meghan.
Crimea River, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle whining about their struggle for privacy. So what do? The power couple invites an entire documentary camera crew to capture every intimate behind-the-scene moment of their pampered lives. The ex-royals detailing the hardships of living with the British royal family and are trying to pass themselves off as, yes, victims. But the royal doc is already creating controversy and getting mocked. The trailer ripped as a victimhood fest. And a picture of Harry and Meghan Markle being hounded by the paparazzi is actually a years-old snap from a Harry Potter premiere.
Janine's office is going to do the right thing, and so is the Department of State under Marco Rubio. Now, for those who don't know who Marco Rubio is, he's this guy. He is the one who is leading the censorship industrial complex investigation. Yeah, that Marco Rubio, the one that I keep talking about.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being here with sharing for the American people a very momentous day in the history of the State Department and the U.S. government in restoring free speech and America's role as the beacon of free speech. Something very historic transpired today. Could you tell the American people what that was?
Well, we ended government-sponsored censorship in the United States through the State Department, and let me explain how we get there. This started out, 10 years ago with this effort of let's go after the messaging that Al-Qaeda and ISIS and others are putting to radicalize people. Who's going to be against that? That sounds normal. And then it was like in 2016, we had this foreign interference in our election. We need to start targeting some of that stuff. By 2020, it had grown into this movement of like actually going after individual American voices. And one of the ways that was being done wasn't just directly, because the guy that was running this thing, Stengel, was actually a guy that was out there saying, Donald Trump talks just like a Russian spy. He talks just like a terrorist. Right. And so do the people around him. But they were also taking money from this program and using it to fund these NGOs, these third-party groups who were supposed to be like impartial. Those groups were then tagging. They were literally tagging and labeling voices in American politics, Ben Shapiro, the Federalist, others, tagging them as foreign agents. So you look at it and say, American taxpayers, through the State Department, were paying groups to attack Americans and to try to silence the voice of Americans. And there were consequences. These weren't just a label they put on people. Some of these people got deplatformed, they got taken down, they couldn't communicate. So it was outrageous. So before President Trump took over, they disbanded this unit. They just renamed it and moved it somewhere else. But now, over the last few months, we've worked on it and just taken it down. And to the extent we're spending money now, we are going to spend money on messaging. It's going to be pro-American messaging, and it's going to be incentivizing and protecting free speech, which is threatened in all over the world, including countries that are allies of ours. The best way to counter disinformation, if that's what people are thinking is out there, the best way to counter disinformation is free speech, is to make sure that what's true has as equal or greater opportunity to communicate as what's not true. We've learned that the hard way. But when you turn disinformation into a weapon, a political weapon, a label that you can use to go after people you don't like and say, anything that person's saying is disinformation. Well, listen, I read mainstream newspapers every day, or I watch mainstream broadcast every day that I know are disinformation. Okay, we have an issue right now. They keep calling it Maryland man deported to El Salvador. No, not Maryland man, El Salvador citizen deported to El Salvador. That's disinformation. Every day, a U.S. senator yesterday said that this guy was a kidnapped American citizen, and they published it in the article without any fact check. He's not an American citizen. So the important thing is that we have free speech so we can counter that, so we can say this is not true. That's the way you handle that. And, but we have instances now in Western countries where people are being arrested. You've seen this. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
People are out there, they put a post, and the cop comes knocking on their door. You're going to go to jail for 60 days for posting something online. Right. This is crazy stuff that's happening around. The vice president addressed this in a speech at the Munich conference back in February. Yes. So we got a lot of work to do, but the most important thing is we're going to make sure that as we communicate to the world, it's going to be pro-American. Things that build up what this country's working on and explaining what we're doing, not attacking Americans who are exercising their First Amendment rights.
The classic work of the State Department in the 20th century.
Yeah,
and you mentioned this network that was paid through the State Department through grants and contracts, and my understanding is that network also targeted the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy, Darren Beattie, who I believe played an important role in this restructuring as well. And credit to you and to the Undersecretary. One of the questions that remains, this is obviously amazing news, I think, to the entire American people about the defunding and the restructuring. There are lingering questions about what was done during that period, where we now have so many people wondering, was I censored because of something the State Department did? Was my news organization bankrupted? Were advertisers contacted about it? And there are aggrieved parties. There's an important historical record that needs to be unearthed. There are active lawsuits. There are many reasons for a public disclosure effort on top of this development today. Are there any efforts underway to be able to have a kind of GEC files as there were for the Twitter files?
Yeah, so I think what we have to do now, and Darren will be big involved in that as well, is sort of document what happened. Because one thing is to say it in a broadcast like this, another thing is to actually put it on paper. And there's two reasons to do it. The first is because I think people who were harmed deserve to know that and be able to prove that they were harmed. And then the other is to make sure it never happens again, right? So that 10 years from now, when someone has a brilliant idea like this again, not brilliant idea like this again, you can point to that and say, oh, this was done once before, and here's a reason why we don't. That's why accountability is important in these things, because it doesn't just provide justice, but it also prevents it from happening in the future. You have something you can point to at the same time and say, these are the kinds of things we want to stay away from. And, it's also a very important lesson here. If I take you back 15 years and I ask somebody, do you think we should be doing more to make sure ISIS and Al-Qaeda are not radicalizing people online? 15 years ago, we would have said, yeah, of course. Right. But look what that turned into. Right. And I'm not saying obviously we don't want ISIS radicalizing everybody, but you have to understand that sometimes some idea that starts out as innocuous or maybe even good intention, whatever, can metastasize, becomes a weapon that can be turned into something else by someone else. That's a valuable lesson here. And everything we do, you have to understand that when you create something, what you created and what it turns into are not necessarily the same thing, especially when the people in charge change.
Right. A Frankensteinian monster that takes on a life of its own. So then that is to say you can commit to the American public now that there will be a transparency effort to actually...
Yeah, that's already started. Because I think as part of justifying doing all this, we had to document this, right? So now I think there's more in-depth. And we'll create a process for people that sort of point. We already know some of the higher profile ones, but there are more than a higher profile ones, right? There are a lot of other, including everyday individual American citizens who suddenly were labeled. And I think this is going to require some cross-jurisdictional work, because some of it's going to require us to go back and prove, okay, somebody got deplatformed in 2021, right? And like in the middle of COVID, 2020, someone got deplatformed. And tracking, we can prove that. People can show, hey, I got deplatformed by the old Facebook or by the old Twitter or whatever. But then linking that to why were they deplatformed? Who told them to deplatform? And if we could somehow, with internal review, create a linkage between some information that came from something the State Department paid for and an actual aggrieved party, that's what's important. Because I think that one thing is to point to the high-profile cases, which we're aware of. But I think when people see that there were actually just individual, everyday Americans that were deplatformed, and for whatever, silenced because somebody associated with this program identified them, I think that's what's really going to be eye-opening to a lot of people. But we didn't want to wait for that to take action. We know enough to already act. Right. But we obviously want to know the depth and the scope of this. That's going to happen. Yeah. Right. It's already happening.
This is a program that has been shrouded in secrecy. Journalists like Matt Taibbi have tried to FOIA for many of these grants and contracts and have encountered the stonewall. So this is, I think, amazing news. Yep. I know that you're a very busy man and appreciate all the time here. So the final question is on the international stage. As you are repositioning the State Department to have the U.S. once again be the global beacon for free speech and liberty, we face threats around the world from censorship laws coming out of the European Union, coming out of Brazil, coming out of really a network of countries that have taken the legitimacy of things like the Global Engagement Center and said, oh, it's okay in the Western world to have media literacy programs, information integrity, dis, malinformation programs. And many of those Global Engagement Center ecosystem partners have been involved in the shaping of those foreign laws. Many have been funded by the State Department and USAID, being signatories on the EU Code of Disinformation, implementing the EU Digital Services Act, which was threatened to be turned against Americans when Elon Musk famously had that X space with Donald Trump during the election season. So my question to you is there any insights that you can provide to the American people about how the State Department is going to go about once again restoring free speech in a world where we are facing foreign threats from the European Union and Brazil and other places to Americans' ability to talk?
Yeah, so the first thing, obviously, is our number one priority is Americans. So we don't want to see an American who happens to be living in London or happens to be living in Europe post something online about American politics or any politics, and all of a sudden they're facing ramifications over there, or they're denied entry, and something happens, oh, we're denying them into our country, or we're going to arrest them because they posted something while living overseas. So our number one interest is the impact it has on Americans. The broader point, which is the one I think the Vice President made very clear in Munich at the security conference, and people freaked out about what he said, but it's true. What is it that links us with Western Europe? What is it that links us with these? It's our shared values. And one of those shared values, we hope, is freedom of expression. I know they don't have a First Amendment, but freedom of expression, right? And if that is eroded, if suddenly these become places where people are targeted because of what they said or what their opinion is, then one of the pillars of our shared interest, beyond military cooperation and everything else, is under attack. And I think he made a very vibrant point that in some ways you are attacking, by attacking freedom of expression, you are attacking one of the pillars of our shared interest, our shared culture, our shared values. And so I think we raised that. We've raised that. I mean, I can tell you we were at an Oval Office meeting with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and this issue came up. So this has been raised. It becomes part of our diplomatic situation that we raise when we interact with foreign interlocutors. I think what's troubling is we understand, like, that's always going to be an issue when certain countries around the world, but when you're dealing with Western European allies, and that's who you're talking to about this stuff, it really tells you how far it's gone and how big a problem it is. So that's a new thing for us to have to raise in those capitals, but we do it, and we do it everywhere. And I personally witnessed the President and the Vice President raise it with multiple foreign leaders. And I think you're going to continue to see an emphasis on that in our diplomacy and what we talk about.
That's fantastic. And I think the actions today will send a message to those foreign bodies that what was done for a very brief period here, really in the scope of our history, is not a legitimate way to pursue international laws. And just on the EU Digital Services Act, I'd feel remiss if I didn't mention that the EU commissioning body there threatened Elon Musk, a non-EU citizen, talking to Donald Trump, a non-EU citizen
during the campaign in October,
and threatened them specifically not to talk about the unrest, the street protests in the UK at the time. The UK is no longer a member of the EU, so the EU was threatening, and today we're hearing they're threatening $1 billion in fines against X for non-compliance with disinformation. And we've seen the head of their commission target non-EU citizens talking to non-EU citizens about non-EU territories. And so this is just one of these things, as this code becomes mandatory in July, to know that the State Department is focused on protecting free speech both within and without is I think, an important thing.
Well, just beyond Elon, if a country or a group of countries, in the case of the EU, although it considers itself sort of a country because these countries have, given over a significant amount of sovereignty in order to become a member of the EU, when you have foreign entities taking actions that go after Americans for speech, that becomes a foreign policy irritant for the United States, and more than an irritant. It becomes an impediment in some cases to cooperate when they're going not just after a high-profile person like Elon, but anybody for that matter. I mean, I think if you extend this out, you could see it, threatening commentators, threatening people that are opining about world events, potentially threatening office holders in the United States. Right. I mean, so what if a American political figure, on the left or right, criticized something that was happening in Europe? Imagine right now if all these people freaking out over Bukele in El Salvador were suddenly being threatened by some Western Hemisphere version of the EU. Oh, we're going to come after you because you're attacking the president of El Salvador. The left would be freaking out.
Right.
So I think that this is a very legitimate issue for us to raise as a bilateral, or in this case with the EU, irritant in our foreign policy. It has to become part of one of the things that we raise when we interact with them about the impact this is having on American citizens. At the end of the day, the number one priority of the State Department is to serve the national interest of the United States and the interest of the American people. We work for the American people.
Right.
It's the United States Department of State.
Yes.
So that we need to return that principle in everything we do, including this.
Right, and this is such a fair and frankly, merciful way of doing this as well. Sounds like you don't want the power to go after the other side for misinformation and things like this.
Oh, we would be here all day. Yeah,
Right.
I mean,
No,
I could build a whole building to go after that.
Right,
But
exactly.
the best way to do it is just to say they're lying, here's the truth.
Right.
That's why we have things like this today.
Right.
And that's why we're able to interact with you and others. That's the best way to do it. And it's annoying, don't get me wrong. I mean, they say things that aren't true. Every day stuff is leaked in the press that's reported on as fact, and it's not fact. Right. Or stuff is reported in commentary, look, commentators say what they want. Mainstream newspapers and mainstream media outlets report things as fact that are completely not true. So our approach to that is not shut them down, not fine them. Right. Our approach to that is to say they're lying. Here's the truth. Right. It's harder, it's annoying, but that's the best way to do it. If you don't do it that way, then you recognize that someday in the future, if you create this power to shut that down, someone in my position will do it to us. And I just think that begins to devolve very rapidly, as we've seen with this experiment that they did.
You're putting the censorship gun down, and the American people are incredibly grateful for it. So thank you so much.
It was
for
the right
taking
thing to do.
today.
Thank you. And thanks for your attention to this topic. I know you've been on this a long time.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
The tables have definitely turned. And don't think that the United States government hasn't been watching what has been going on with this prince in the United States. Not only is it my voice, but it's all of your voices that have gotten the attention. Don't think that all that noise that we have been making over the past 5 years, that nobody was listening. There's a reason why I was told to continue to keep going, even though I know that there's a target on this channel. Anyway, I'm going to leave you with this. Share your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Such a fraud.